This is the Team Performance Podcast, where we explore issues at the heart of leadership, team development and organisational culture. I'm your host, Mark Gilroy, and in this series, we're delving into issues around team dynamics, team development and, of course, team performance. Let's welcome today's guest. Welcome to the latest in our series of interviews. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Wilson Rugelsjøen from LevelUp HR. Originally from the UK and now based in Oslo, Rachel has spent time in a number of senior HR roles in finance and investment banking, sovereign wealth and tech, and has been running her own consulting firm for over 3 years now. I know. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you, Mark. It's lovely to be here and it's lovely to connect again. Thank you for having me. Looking forward.
It is. We've known each other for quite a long time, haven't we, actually? I was looking at this earlier on.
We have, and I want to say, I think it's at least 10 years. It's more than a decade, right? Because it's when I was in the Norwegian oil fund. I think that's when we connected and we did a lot of work on teams, high-performing teams.
Yeah, and since then you've moved into some other areas of work, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about. We've got loads of things that we can explore today based on your experience as an expat. But I wanted to start off with a question that we've been asking all of our guests in this particular series, which is all around teams. So I'm really interested to know, what's the most memorable team that you've ever encountered?
Oh, there's been a few, for sure, and memorable is a good word, right? And memorable maybe for different reasons. I suppose there's two parts that spring to mind, the teams that I've been part of, as a HR leader and a HR business partner, and then the teams I've worked with, the leaders that I've supported or the management teams I've been part of, but in my capacity as a HR professional or a HR business partner, so you're like guiding and advising from the outside or you're in as part of a HR team, right? I suppose the best team or the most high-performing and enjoyable team, perhaps, that I've worked in is one from quite early in my career at one of the investment banks that I worked in. And I have to say it's, for better or worse, certainly been, it's been the blueprint for me around what a successful team looks and feels like. So when I say for better or for worse, it's I often think back and sort of miss that feeling and that team because it was just so good. It's been hard to replicate since and I'm still in touch with the folks that were part of that period of time and that team. So and I guess why was it so memorable? Why was it so great? I think genuinely, there are three things. It was, early in my career, that sort of sets a lot of the tone. You're very much learning and growing. But I think the leader of the team and the individuals that made it up in terms of the diversity of that team were like the three key ingredients as to why it's so memorable.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? So many people who've answered that question in this series have said that it was an unforgettable team, either for better or worse.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And
have sort of listed the leader as one of the things that made that team so memorable.
Yeah,
for better or worse.
She was phenomenal. Of course, there's been a level of you're comparing leaders that come after to her in many respects. I mean, I've had some great ones since, absolutely, and some less great ones for sure. But I think that team and her leadership certainly set the blueprint for that. But other people share that view of her as well, more broadly across that organisation. So there was something very special about the team, the makeup and the time, maybe in history, but also her leadership for sure.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm really interested to explore a little bit about your experience as an expat. So coming from working in a variety of roles and living in the UK and then moving to Norway and having a variety of roles and now running a business based in Norway. What have been some of your experiences of those differences in both the corporate cultures, but also just the kind of national identity and cultures?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a great question. It's a big question, right? Could almost warrant a thesis response, right? But yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the national, the culture, of the environment, the country, and the corporate, which is is quite different. I would say Scandinavia and Norway within Scandinavia and the Nordics versus the UK, where I was based prior to me moving here. And I think the roles that I held in the UK, they were more global and international, because being based in London, I was working within global teams or EMEA teams and responsible for a remit that, you know, spanned more than just the UK, right? So that obviously influences your experience of, you know, national and corporate culture in those settings. That was primarily in banking and investment banking. But certainly it was a real transition and quite a culture shock, I would say, moving from London to Oslo and moving from investment banking in the finance world to what I thought was similar in the Norwegian oil fund, but was really quite different for a number of different reasons. And some of them were sort of cultural in terms of, you know, Scandinavia and Norway, and some of them was also the company itself and the mandate of the organisation. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, kind of on a more private level or sort of friends here, people will often say to you, oh, you know, it's not, you know, the UK is not so far away, it's not so dissimilar to here, you know, in Norway. And of course I have many different friends in the like international expat community that are from the US, South America, Australia, you know, and also places where culturally it's very different. You know, if you think about, we won't get into sort of Erin Meyer and her work, but it's work that I'm very interested in and quite passionate about, you know, in terms of how she looks at culture and on all the different sort of decision making, proximity, leadership, consensus, etc., communication. There are cultures that are much further away from Scandinavia than the UK is, but nevertheless there's lots and lots of very small differences, I think, that come together to make your experience quite different. So I think that's been more my experience in general of Scandinavia, just the, you know, multiple smaller things that are a little bit more under the radar, perhaps, that definitely play out and can get magnified in certain situations. I've now, of course, been here a very long time. I've probably spent, you know, more years now in Norway than I have in the UK. So, you know, not long ago I felt like I was saying sort of 50-50 balance, but now I think it's more heavily weighted to Norway. Nevertheless, you know, I have clients that are global, international, and clients based outside of Norway, but primarily based here.
Yeah, it's a very small thing, but one of the things that I was always really taken aback by, and it took me a little while to adjust to in my visits to spend time working in Norway, was, and I don't know if it has a special name, but there is a kind of a non-verbal gesture which is designed to, well, it goes like this.
I knew you were going to say that.
Did you? Right. And I remember the first time I was chatting with somebody and that happened, and someone doing it, and I thought, oh, wow, I've really excited them, or they're shocked by what I'm saying, because I'd read that cue based on my mental model of what that looks like, which is usually a gasp of surprise. Whereas it took me a while to kind of learn that actually it's just a kind of, oh, yeah. I understood it as to say, right. Oh, yes, I'm with you. I understand you. And isn't that interesting, a kind of response?
I love that you mentioned it, because my daughter was actually kind of making fun of that particular gesture with a Norwegian friend of hers the other day, and we sort of got into why and what and all the funny things, and we quickly jumped to a similar non-verbal, a similar cue that, and it's closely related to the So there's, I mean, it's a long conversation of its own, but it's, the Scandinavian languages have far fewer words, right? They're a lot less rich in terms of, I think, the way native English speakers use their language, right?
Less flowery,
so,
yes.
For sure. You know, and you compare it to the French as well. I'm always fascinated by when I watch French stuff and how it's translated into the Norwegian. It's like suddenly the Norwegian comes alive because it's translating from the French richness of the way they use language again, because it's words that you just don't come into contact with in Norway. Because I think, and so those things do, you know, they do have an impact. They do play a role. You know, I remember when I first moved here, my husband, I think it was, saying, you don't need to kind of speak so much and so loudly on public transport. And I definitely figured out quickly that you give people much more personal space. If there's a free seat next to somebody, but there's also, a whole row behind them, that you definitely go and sit in the row behind. A number of those kind of non-verbal cues as well that you learn and that have an impact.
I think it's wonderful because it's kind of both economical, but also really courteous in not taking up too much space in the conversation. I think very often in a lot of other Western world cultures, that same would be used as a replacement for, oh, yeah, I absolutely agree, and kind of jumping in on the conversation, whereas it's just a way of just ever so slightly nudging in without overpowering the other person. And I've always thought it was a really lovely little nuance of culture. Does that come through in teams as well when you're working with them? Because I think often when you're working with groups, you've got those sort of different dynamics going on. Do you find that in Norwegian culture, those dynamics look different as a result?
I think so. What you got me thinking of, Mark, is we're very focused. I think Norwegian culture is it's very respectful. The use of the word humble is very frequent. It's almost like a standing joke that you can't say like I'm proud without saying humble and proud, because it's so sort of in the DNA here. What I would say is that how it plays out in a very positive way is people, they don't interrupt each other. It's a little bit like Japan in that respect, cutting in or interrupting. And it can be for the most positive of reasons, like you just, in your example, you're sort of excited, you're in agreement, you want to demonstrate your enthusiasm for what they're saying and also your agreement. But there's a real sort of just way of responding and communicating that is very much you wait your turn. Challenging for an extrovert like me, as you know, but I've really benefited from learning how to work with that in a good way. That's just working with extroversion. I think in environments that are, and if I go back to my first role here, I was working with people, or at least with clients, and some teams in particular that I would describe as quite introvert in their, both the individual personal preferences and styles in the team, but also like the type of work they were doing. And I really had to kind of harness my extroversion in a good way to work with those people successfully. And I think, that was around really kind of honing my active listening skills, writing things down, making lots of notes by way of prep for conversations, but actually then in larger team meetings, really making notes as people were talking. And if ideas came to me, rather than at the next opportunity kind of jump in to kind of develop the point or ask the question, I would sort of often make a lot of notes and then structure my thinking a little bit more and then wait for an opportune moment. Sometimes that moment passes, of course. But I think these are the things that culturally have had definitely an influence on me personally in the way I've worked and learned to work slightly differently. It doesn't work in every group, and of course multiple teams are also international as well. So it's interesting. And I think on the sort of more challenging side, I think because I come from a background that's very, it's kind of fast-paced, high performance, the drive for results in banking, quite open and upfront, kind of two of those banks were American banks. So it's very sort of, I would say, I think people pride themselves on their kind of honesty and directness in Scandinavia and in Norway. But I think it's different from the honesty and directness you get with Americans, for example, or in the organisational cultures I worked in the UK, with that as a focus. Here, I think it's more about the language. It's honest and direct, but not necessarily the culture, actually, or the corporate culture. So I think giving feedback, and feedback that might be more on the constructive side, needs for improvement. I think people are actually very, very kind of wary of doing that, need a lot of support and coaching to be able to do that effectively because of this consensus and harmonious need or drive in the Scandinavian cultures. It's a very sort of, we take care of everybody, everybody's equal and alike. The drive for, you said about, giving people respect and personal space. It ties with that. And that can be very positive, but that can also be challenging in terms of people getting actual real feedback when it counts in a way that's constructive, because we don't want to hurt feelings. And that for me is quite different in sort of UK and American environments, where it's a little bit more sort of, you're going to know where you stand with me.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to rectify or take a different direction very quickly because you're going to know the score.
Yeah, I've often kind of had this at the back of my head. My sort of cynical brain looks at frameworks and models and devices, things like Thomas Kilmann, conflict styles, or even the idea of something like psychological safety, because it's very often, it emerges from a broader Western world, often American kind of corporate mentality. I'm never always sure whether it translates internationally in that way.
Okay,
I find myself wondering whether something like psychological safety might look a bit different in somewhere like Scandinavia.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. My first, thoughts when you talk about psychological safety is, goes to trust, right? The ability to trust and to feel safe in the working environment, let's say within a team. And to be able to be, your full or authentic self and raise questions, make contributions, push back or disagree without the fear of repercussions, retribution. And whether that looks and feels different, quite likely, because Scandinavia is such a trust-based society, right? We trust that it's a very trusting society. I mean, that's known. It's kind of evidenced in the research. You can see it in the way of life as well. You saw that very clearly in the reaction to COVID. Very law-abiding. Very we trust that the state's got it covered. Friends in the UK, ex-colleagues in the UK. They have quite differing, and they have much more kind of punchy views in terms of those decisions being sort of taken or made. We love a good debate and a deliberation and to push back and in a different way. In the UK, here it's just a bit like, these are the rules, this is for the best, this is why it works, like kind of fall in line, because I think there's a general consensus that like we trust that it's for the best. So I guess it's, I don't know, could you say it's like inbuilt a little bit?
That's how it.
So I don't know
that's
whether
how it felt when you were describing
really...
it. Like the baseline is higher for trust.
Yeah. The baseline's high for trust. Yeah, I think, and I think I would almost like leave it at there, because otherwise it demands actual real investigation. We know this because we're seeing it in like the political sphere, and I'm no politician, but there's a level of complacency and a level of kind of entrepreneurship that can stifle. And we're seeing that since, they say, like about 2013, sort of Norway was at its peak. We're seeing very large changes in the political towards Labour. Much more sort of layers of tax, talent exodus from the country, because it's like a squeeze to the middle, right? And of course that is around this kind of consensus, safety, spreading the wealth, making sure everything's fair. I think there are consequences that relate to it. But you're right, the baseline is perhaps higher. I think there's research, and I forget the names and the dates, but I think there's like a naivety connection. And there's research that shows that also that we can be a bit too trusting and spilling over into naivety. There's research to show that there's a lot that you can be more susceptible to breaches,
Yeah,
etc.
that makes perfect sense. It's got me thinking about, that phrase around being the humble and proud
Yeah,
connection.
yeah.
And how does that come through when you're working with teams? I know, you've spent many years looking at, high performance, working with teams who want to become more high performing, who maybe already are high performing. How does that kind of reconcile itself with the idea of a team identifying as a high
Yeah.
performing team?
It is really hard, and we haven't touched on this. You've probably heard of janteloven.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a story or a fable, but it's basically the kind of the belief or the focus on everybody's equal, don't believe you're anything more. And so there's a real sort of don't stick your head above the parapet focus, I would say, that connects to that, this being proud but humble. You sort of, and I see it in feedback, or when praise is given or when praise is received, people often deflect very quickly and give that praise, and that can be a really good thing. Give that praise to the team, even though it was maybe clearly one individual that was the successful person, or there aren't winners really. It's more about you participated, and we reward that. We don't reward the winner. And that can be very good for harmonious working and building cohesive teams that collaborate and can be are stronger by being driven through consensus. I think Sweden's different again and is much more consensus driven. It's not quite at that end of the scale, but that can be very positive when collaboration is a focus, right? And I think more and more collaboration is king, right? The world is so, we hear the phrase VUCA all the time, don't we? Volatile, uncertain. Help me out with the last two.
Complex and ambiguous.
Ambiguous, that's right. And we're seeing that more and more. If you think about the geopolitical picture, the markets, the world since COVID, the way we're working. And so I think the need to ask more questions, work together with others, leverage the skills of other humans much more is paramount, because we don't even know the questions to ask, let alone the answers to them. So I think that, consensus and collaboration, ability to work with others is only going to become more and more important. And probably also why I'm so passionate about working with teams and developing teams. I love my executive coaching work. I love advising, leaders and HR leaders alike. What is really inspiring, and I know that's, very similar to you, is how do you really, I see so much untapped potential out there in the organizations that I support and in the teams, because it's around helping those people to work better together, more effectively together. So much talent in individuals, but, the sum is so much greater than the whole. And I think I just see that so clearly. And I think the really exciting thing now for, the leadership development or the HR, but, the people professions is helping tap into that, helping drive that in this, new normal, if you like, with AI, with a multi-generational workforce, with, just things, expectations and the market demanding different things of leaders now.
Yeah. I came across a lovely reframe of VUCA a little while ago by a futurist called James Cassio.
Okay.
And he very much kind of redesigned it for post-pandemic. I'll leave some notes to his paper in the show notes for this one. But he described it as BANI, BANI. His argument was that actually we've gone so far past the idea of just constant volatility and uncertainty that a new framework is needed. And I kind of see that in a way. I've used it a few times actually since, and people seem to get along with it. But it does use very high emotion words. So BANI is brittle. So the idea that things that were once completely solidified and sort of set in stone have now become incredibly easy to break.
Yeah.
Whether that's frameworks or processes or cultures or values. Then the A is for anxious. I get this sort of cycle of fear that goes on, particularly with the rise of fake news and disinformation. Then we have the N is non-linear. So, two things that are seemingly completely disconnected actually having an effect on each other. Somebody decides to send off a missile in this part of the world and actually has repercussions in lots of different places that are seemingly unconnected. And then the last one is incomprehensible, which I think we are seeing like an awful lot of at the moment. And I really like it because it does explain, I think, why there is a bit of a shift in a lot of teams to kind of default to really safe, very low risk decision making.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's the antidote to something like Banny.
Interesting. Yeah.
So courageous and, courage becomes something that's really difficult to draw on.
Okay.
And I know when you and I, we started talking about this episode, you were talking about helping teams build more courageous cultures. And I think it's never been more difficult to do that because courage, I think in general, is at an all-time low.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you really have to marry that with care, right, and compassion. And it's funny because, as you know, I write a lot on LinkedIn, and I'd written something recently on, leadership and the skills and capabilities that are now required of leaders. Notwithstanding that, I know many leaders feel that it requires superhuman powers. The expectations are that they're superhumans, and of course, they're not. 99% of the leaders I work with are doing their absolute best and care deeply about doing a great job of it. But someone had written on my post, it sounds like leaders are now required to be social workers these days. And I suppose what he was picking up on, and it was a part of a thoughtful, insightful comment that he'd made. But he was picking up on the fact that, well, that is the need. As you say, people are needing, they're requiring a level of emotional intelligence in their leaders and colleagues because of that context that, both Vuka and Barney highlight. And structures aren't, as rigid. Strategies can't be created and set in stone for 3 to 5 years anymore because they're irrelevant. They need to be in constant flux. Strategy needs to be fluid and tweakable, right? And that requires something different. It's not a one and done. The old sort of rigid systems, rules, procedures, they're not always relevant. They need to be reassessed. Same with our org charts and org structures. I do a lot of work on organizational design because most often it's actually not personal. If there's friction in a team, it's often because of unclear roles, overlapping responsibilities, poorly articulated or thought through workflows, and not enough systems and processes, forums even, to allow teams to collaborate. We want to collaborate, we need to collaborate, but the system, the structure isn't set us up to enable us to do that. But I think, back to this chappie, he was really, expressing a level of frustration that, this was needed. And I think it's fair, but it doesn't go away. That need is absolutely there. But what we need to be doing is figuring out, well, how do we equip our leaders with these, new coaching skills that they need? How do we equip them? How do we measure their emotional intelligence and help them develop it? We know it's possible. It's a muscle to be built, to be trained. We have studies, that show that those that have perhaps the lowest amounts of emotional intelligence when they're first tested make the biggest gains once they go through a program designed to lift it and improve it. They obviously have to be open-minded enough to, take the test, see it's important, know that an emotional intelligence in all its multifacets holds a lot of the key, is the route to great leadership. But the expectations are they're different. They're different now of leaders, and it's not a job for everybody. A lot of people are there by default or by design, not through necessarily choice. The career trajectory they've been on has sort of dictated that success here means people management responsibilities. I think work is being designed differently now anyway. We also know that less people are interested in becoming leaders probably also because it's harder. And maybe also in a good way, there are other opportunities and multiple ways to progress that aren't just the old school up the pyramid chain or climbing the ladder.
I remember seeing that post and that particular comment, and I experienced I don't know what it's called.
You didn't wait in there, Mark.
There is a reason why I didn't, because I often see these things and I have to do whatever the keyboard equivalent of biting your tongue is, because I have an immediate initial reaction.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that because I might offend somebody, or I don't want this to descend into a kind of slang. But my initial feeling when I saw it was, would that be so bad that we had leaders who thought they were doing social work and actually, because they're like the glue of the whole business.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what social workers do. They help things connect and join together and feel supported and be seen and understood and validated. And we would be living in such a different world if we had more leaders who saw their role as social work.
Yeah.
I feel that deeply.
Yeah.
And I didn't comment because I wasn't up for that as an argument. Because I detected a hint of strong cynicism from the original post.
Oh, okay, well, maybe I was being too generous in my interpretation of the comment, but I often have the same. What's the count to 10? Do I respond, or do I park this? But I think I felt there was enough kind of good stuff there to get into. But it's so interesting, and I think there are different ways to reach people as well now also, and I've probably learned this with age and experience, and the Norwegians have a lovely expression in Norwegian, and it translates to like, I've been out a winter night or two. So like, you've weathered a few storms, like I've been around the block enough to But I think, and if I think back to my previous leaders and colleagues in investment banking and finance, and at least back then the way to reach them was very much with a focus on what you said, because we're humans and most businesses are people businesses. You've got to, I don't believe in people strategy or HR strategy, actually. I only believe in the strategy of the business, and the way you deliver that is through people. And so if you could sort of marry that with, I know, dear leader, you're focused ultimately on results, profitability, achieving your KPIs, but you're going to do that much better if you engage these people in a way that's human. Because, you and I both know that's actually how it happens. We're not robots. So, I guess that's one piece, but there is another I suppose slightly softer, but I guess I think quite clear in the world now that that's what people are crying out for. In many ways, COVID had a lot of silver linings, not just for flexibility and hybrid working, which was obviously one huge benefit, but also companies really woke up to, at least I think, and I saw in Norway, companies really woke up to the value of people and the importance of people at work and taking care of them. I feel that the HR profession really accelerated, really leveled up after the pandemic, because we suddenly, were much more focused on people at work and all the different elements of HR, let's say, that were perhaps missing before. Norway is a lot, it's a country of much less people, right, versus the UK. But HR hasn't been on the agenda here in the same way. But I think really accelerated the profession. It was almost like HR's moment to shine and really show what we were made of. And I think, some people really capitalized on that in a good way. There's the flip side of that, of course. There's been a huge amount of burnout in the profession, as we've seen, and that's, been a global consequence for sure, because we were also asked to step up into, health and safety, crisis management, and spread incredibly, incredibly thin. So, yeah, back to this care and compassion. You mentioned courage kind of at the start of this little section. I think courage probably connects more for me around feedback that we touched on earlier. And I think that's with a particular view to helping kind of Nordic or Scandinavian leaders to display that same amount of courage in giving feedback and giving, Kim Scott's radical candor, right? Care personally and challenge directly, and the combination of those two is good leadership, but compassionate leadership. Being honest about what's working and what isn't working is also a way to care. Protecting people from tough messages is actually the opposite, and so it's more around kind of coaching and supporting leaders to demonstrate courage in that way, from a giving feedback perspective, and very much focused on feedback for growth, and not linking to the emotional intelligence. When we have robust emotional intelligence and work with it, then we are responding rather than reacting. And I think when you're giving feedback, you really need to dedicate the time to thinking through how you're going to do that, not procrastinating, not delaying messages, not putting them off till mid-year or year end, but giving feedback that has the genuine best interests of the person receiving it, and not to offload emotionally because you need to get it off your chest. That's low emotional intelligence, and that's where I like to work on the two together, right? Courage, compassion, feedback, emotional intelligence, feedback for growth that then transpires into results and a better team, more enjoyable, more high-functioning, high-performing team.
I love that. And that really explains something to me that I've often wondered, which is when you and I met, you were working with a different kind of psychometric tool, which is widely used in the Scandi region, and it's always been really popular there. And my hypothesis was that it's about the directness, but actually hearing you say that, and it's something that we're finding with PCS now, actually, is that very often that need for honest and courageous feedback is often just one step too far. But actually, if you give people a framework and a kind of a box to put that feedback in, they will often do it very, very generously, because you're almost kind of one removed from that very personal experience of saying, this happened that you did, and I experienced it in this way. So, we definitely find it with PCS in that actually, if you give people an opportunity to feedback, they'll take it, and they'll tell that leader exactly what they need, and they'll build them a little roadmap to follow, and it becomes less like guesswork, and suddenly it's just something that they can do that allows them to tailor their behavior and actions to exactly what the team needs at that point in time. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense, you would not believe. I've almost got goosebumps. Right, so first I'm scribbling away to stop myself from jumping in and interrupting you.
Bless
and
you.
To make sure. And also because if I interrupt you, I miss all the nuggets. I miss all the other stuff, like where you were going to go. I could so easily take you off in a different direction now, but I'm like, yeah, there's more. Keep talking. So thank you for that, because it makes so much sense that you've just almost unlocked why I'm having so much success with working with teams using these frameworks and models. And I'm really excited to get into PCS. I really am. But when I first moved here, and I see this with people that have lived in moved to Norway more recently as well, the advice was, and is, this is so funny, and this is why it works, this is why these models work, and this language and frameworks that remove it from the personal. So I was told, like, you join a group, you join a book club, you join a ski club, you join a sewing club, because life here and the culture requires those frameworks. It likes rules, frameworks, these things to make it safe, I guess, because I guess it gives a shared topic, a shared theme to like bond or collect around. Maybe it's something to do with safety, but because we don't do small talk, we don't go to the pub,
No.
we don't strike up conversations with randoms on the street. Like when I'm back in the UK, like York, Manchester, Cambridge, London, they're the cities I'm like, what are you? If I've not been back for a while, I'm like, why are you? I've just pressed, to cross the street, and so, someone stood there with their dog waiting to go over. Sometimes I'll literally jump out of my skin and be like, why are they talking to me? I don't know you. Do you know me? I remember being in Cambridge one Christmas, and I was in Lewes, I think. I don't know whether I was sort of adjusting something in the mirror, and a woman asked me if I wanted to, like, borrow a lipstick, I think. It was, yeah, she had I was a bit too far from the mirror, so she was sort of so keen to help me, and I honestly just was flabbergasted. But I went back to my friend and was like, oh my God, what's happening to me, I can't interact anymore. I've become Scandinavian, I've become Norwegian. But the point you're making, Mark, is that these frameworks, they really work here in particular because they make it safe, and they take the personal out of it just enough to be able to then leverage that as the tool through which, it's like a vehicle through which you're connecting or delivering feedback. And also, I don't know how PCS works on this front, but I like, and many of my clients and their teams are Norwegian or Scandinavian, but there'll be many other nationalities as well, in these international companies. So what I really like about it is the diversity and inclusion piece, because often these tools give you a shared language, and you're looking at, preferences, drivers, motivations under the bonnet, if you like, not, but I thought you were saying that or communicating in that way or requiring this when a decision was on the table, because you're British or because you're female. It's like, well, no, it's because actually I'm highly analytical and structured, and then I need or look for certain things here, but I realise, that's not necessarily the way in which you work. So, like, how can we meet in the middle so we can both get the best out of each other when we work together and achieve the results we need? I think these frameworks work in particular here because, we like a rule as well. It's really interesting to hear your experience of working here, because you've worked here a lot as well, and you have a different lens again because, of course, I live here and I'm very integrated. I speak the language. My kids are half Norwegian, half British, so it's nice to have these different perspectives as well.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing hearing a bit more about your experiences. I feel like we kind of touched the tip of the iceberg there, and we should probably come back and look a little bit further. Not unlike culture itself, if we're going to use an iceberg metaphor. I'm thinking about, if people are listening to this and they want to know more about you and how they can work with you and some of the things that you're working on, and read some of those posts, importantly, on LinkedIn, what's the best way of finding out more about you, Rachel?
I think the best way is to, I would say follow me on LinkedIn and connect with me there. I do take kind of bookings directly through LinkedIn. You can actually access my calendar through the link on my bio. And, book a call if there is help needed on the consulting and advisory front on, people, culture, leadership, and, how you can get the best results out of your people. I think, my mantra remains the same as it has been, after 20 years in corporate HR. It's about creating results through people who thrive. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon as well.
No, I hope not.
Very much the focus. So I think it's a really exciting space to work in, actually.
It is indeed. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'll make sure I'll leave links to all of those places in the show notes. And we will speak again on a lot of these points.
Look forward to it, Mark. I've been scribbling away, so yeah.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. Meanwhile, if you're interested to learn more about how the PCS approach can help you explore leadership, performance and culture within your business, get in touch with our team and we'll be happy to help.